F. Yasir. Context of the poem. The poem, The Charge of the Light Brigade, was written as a response to the atrocities done to the British soldiers and to honor them at the Battle of Balaclava. During the time, during the Crimean War in 1854, during the battle, as the British lines were being pushed further back by the Russians, a miscommunication happened between Commander Lewis Nolan and Lord Corrigan. In the heat of the moment, Lord Corrigan, who was leading the British troops, gave an unclear order to charge at the Russians. In that moment, nearly 700 British cavalry, armed with swords, blitzed the Russian army with cannons and guns. Nearly 20 minutes later, out of the 670 cavalry who charged, 110 were killed and another 160 were wounded. The British went on to win the war over Russia, thanks to the sacrifices of the 2,500 casualties they faced. Context of the author. Lord Alfred Tennyson. Tennyson was born on August 6, 1809, in Lincolnshire, England. Tennyson struggled with his own personal issues. One example is the turbulent environment caused by his father's drinking and terrible depressive episodes. Led Alfred to turn to writing for refuge. When he left home to enroll with his brothers at Trinity College in Cambridge in 1827, he wrote his first piece of poetry. Tennyson married Emily Selwood, a close friend of his sister's, in 1850, the same year he was appointed Poet Laureate of England. Tennyson was required to provide patriotic poetry for the public as the official poet of the royal family. He wrote The Charge of the Light Brigade in this capacity in 1854. Poem and auditory. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. All in the valley of death, rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said. Into the valley of death, rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. There's not to make reply, there's not to reason why. There's to do and die, into the valley of death, rode the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered. Stormed at, with shot and shell, boldly they rode and well, into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell rode the 600. Flashed all their sabres bare, flashed all they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army while all the world wondered, plunged in the battery smoke right through the line they broke, Cossack and Russian reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered, then they rode back, but not the 600. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them, and volleyed. Stormed at with shot and shell, while horse and hero fell. They that had fought so well came through the jaws of death. Back from the mouth of hell, all that was left of them, all left of the 600. When can their glory fade, or the wild charge they made? All the world wondered, honor the charge they made, honor the Light Brigade, noble 600. The charge of the Light Brigade is a cavalry force specifically referring to the British Light Cavalry Force during the Battle of Balaclava. The men rode on light, swift, unarmored horses. The men carried sabers and lances. They were built for optimum mobility and speed and were meant for skirmishing and reconnaissance. Charge: an assault, someone or something by charging it with aggression. Stanza 1. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, rode the 600. Forward the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, he said, into the valley of death, rode the 600. Repetition. The speaker repeats the phrase half a league distance about a mile and a half. This implies that before they can even meet their foe, they must ride a considerable distance while under artillery fire. As a result, the attack is reckless and desperate, and the speaker recounts it with appropriate dread. It is like riding into the valley of death. As the speaker claims, the charge is therefore suicidal. The repetition emphasizes this desperation. Imagery. Tennyson used the images to help the reader visualize the troops' bravery and despair. The imagery of the Valley of Death, used by Tennyson to underline what ultimately awaits them just half a league away, demonstrates how they had ample opportunity to turn around, yet the soldiers continued to advance. This implies that courage is only one aspect of heroism and includes responsibility or the willingness to carry out instruction despite the consequences. As you can see in the quote, "For the Light Brigade, charge for the guns, followed by them riding into battle in the sights of artillery and certain death."
Stanza 2. Forward the Light Brigade. Was there a man dismayed? Not though the soldier knew someone had blundered. There is not to make reply, there is not to reason why. There is but to do and die. Into the valley of death, road to 600. Shift. The transition from forward the Light Brigade to was there a man disappointed shows that even if they are brave, they are still afraid. However, the return to there is not to make reply shows the bravery is the capacity to understand, to stand up even in the face of fear. Even though some parts are measured metrically to create the sound of a horse galloping, Lord Tennyson uses free words effectively to convey the idea of chaos. It's also similar in the use of poetic devices like rhymes to create the impression of chaos in the charge. Stanza 3. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them, volleyed and thundered, stormed at with shot and shell. Boldly they rode and well into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode 600. Analysis. We see how the author starts off with cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon in front of them. This shows us the selflessness of the cavalrymen who risked their lives for the brigade. This is shown by Tennyson through boldly they rode and well into the jaws of death, into the mouth of hell, rode 600. In line 24, we see the author mention into the jaws of death. It doesn't mean the jaws of death, it's like exactly, but it's a metaphor that compares the jaws of death to a creature that's threatening the soldiers. Stanza 4. Flash all their sabers bare, flashed as they turned in air, sabering the gunners there, charging an army, while all the world wondered, plunged in the battery smoke, right through the line they broke. Cossack and Russian reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered. They rode back, but not 600. In stanza 4, the author explains the battle's details, so the audience has a real experience as to what the battlefield was like. Tennyson represents the intenseness of the brigade by plunged in the battery smoke. This shows the actions of the soldiers. Reeled from the saber stroke, shattered and sundered. The verbs reeled, shattered, and sundered in these sentences paint a vivid image of the combat between the two troops. We see this in the stanza. We see that the bullets are flying around them and wouldn't stop. Volleyed and thundered, stormed it with shot and shell. Stanza 5. Cannon to the right of them, cannon to the left of them, cannon behind them. Volleyed and thundered, stormed it with shot and shell. While horse and hero fell, they had fought so well, came through the jaws of death, back from the mouth of hell. All that was left of them, left of 600. Repetition. The poet uses repetition of the canon to start the stanza to establish a tone of desperation for the army as they saw that they were surrounded and wanted to give them one final shot at winning the battle, even if it meant that there was a high chance of them dying. It also gives the reader a chance to go into the mind of the army and what their thought process was when they were ordered to charge and to emphasize the heroism of the charging shoulders. It also ties into the context of the poem as the main aim was to motivate the British public of the war. This repetition gives off a very patriotic feeling to the reader. Personification. The personification of death and hell gives the reader insight into the horrible things that the soldiers had to witness during the battle and how the charge was basically seen as a suicide for the British, but they still did it anyway. It also could have been seen as the soldiers were going to the battle were going to their deaths, but for those who survived, it was still a very saddening moment as they had to witness many of their friends and fellow soldiers die or get wounded. Therefore, they were coming back from hell. It also gives the author a creative way of interpreting the way the surviving soldiers felt to the reader as they were truly shell shocked and horrified at what they went through. And they're stuck with those memories of battle forever, just like the idea of being stuck in hell forever after death. Stanza 6. When can their glory fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, all the world wondered. Honor the charge they made, honor the Light Brigade, Noble 600. Repetition. In stanza 6, the repetition of the word honor and exclamation points adds more connotation to the overall patriot-like feel of the poem. It really helps get the idea of honoring the fallen British soldiers. Repetition. The repetition number 600 at the end of most stanzas actually holds the story within it. At the start of the poem, the stanzas ended with Road to 600, which is while Brigade is on their way to the Russians. In the middle of the story, the stanzas end with not the 600 and left of 600, indicating that the charge is done. The army is on their way back. Towards the end of the poem, the stanza shifts to the Noble 600, which is saying that the soldiers, friends, and family have been notified of their death and they want to honor them.
In stanza 5, the poem alludes to hell to help get the point across that the men charging the Russians really did go through a lot of pain and shell shock watching their friends die and not being able to do anything about it. It also shows how the shell shock the soldiers had will be with them for their whole life, like the idea that someone trapped in hell for eternity and they can't do anything about it to change. Another archetype is of the hero. It's shown in the poem when the poet is trying to honor the soldiers for their sacrifice, saying that even when they knew they were going to die, they still charged forward without any complaint, and for that reason they should be seen as heroes of the war and shouldn't be forgotten of what they did for the British Empire and war cause. Tone and tone shifts. The poem starts out as a desperate and intimidated feel, as the second stanza reveals that the soldiers know that they were going to die, and so they should charge no matter what, so they can at least do something to help the war cause. In the third stanza, the tone shifts from desperate to heroic, when the soldiers boldly rode their horses while being shot at with artillery shells. This is the stanza where the true bravery of the soldiers is first revealed, as the reader now imagines what horrific conditions the soldiers went through. Toward the middle of the fifth stanza, though, the tone shifts to more address the British public, as it has a more patriotic feel to it, telling the people about the atrocities the soldiers of the war are facing, and that they should truly honor the army for their brave actions during the Battle of Balaclava. The author's purpose. A passionate poem, the Charge of the Light Brigade both honors and mourns the battle's actions. The concept of the valiant and gallant British soldiers whose obligation was to fight for justice emerged during the Crimean War. The courageous cavalry charge remembered in the Charge of the Light Brigade took place during the Crimean War. The cavalry are portrayed as heroes in Tennyson's poem because they are willing to die without challenging their superiors' orders. The structure. As the stanzas go chronologically from what happened first to last, we can see that each stanza advances the storyline of the attack. There are 6 stanzas, each representing 100 of the 600 cavalrymen, as if they were memorial stones. We also learn that there is no similarity between the stanzas, as one can be 12 lines, 9 lines, or even 10 lines. Tennyson utilized a number of lines for each stanza that seemed suitable. The poet's poetic effect is created by the repetitive use of numerous phrases. Every phrase is dactyl-like, meaning that it has 2 stressed syllables and 2 unstressed syllables after every pair of stressed syllables. Theme. The Charge of the Light Brigade honors a selfless cavalry charge that took place during the Crimean War. Tennyson's poem, which was written 6 weeks later, makes the case that the cavalry are heroes since they are willing to die without questioning their leader's commands. Therefore, the poem's theme implies that courage is only one aspect of heroism. It also includes responsibility, or the ability to carry out instructions despite the consequences. So for our original poem, we wrote it about a World War II invasion that became known as D-Day, in which the Allied forces raided northern France so that they could try and free Europe. Scandinavian mile, Scandinavian mile, Scandinavian mile onward. All in the beaches of death ran in the 130,000. Forward the Allied forces charged with guns into the sands of death. Forward the Allied forces. Was their man not shaken? Not though the soldiers knew that he wouldn't see his fellow man. There's not to retreat, there's not to question, there's but to do and die. Into the sands of death ran the 130,000. Man to the right of them, man to the left of them, man in front of them, volleyed and thundered, threatened with shot and shell. Fearlessly they went into the beaches of death, into the portal of hell, ran in the 130,000. Swung all their arms bare, swung as they turned in air, ending the gunners there. All the world wondered. Plunged from the gunning men, right through the fence they broke. Italian and German reeled from the gun's power, shattered and sundered. They cleared the enemy line, but not all 130,000. Man to the right of them, man to the left of them, man behind them. Volleyed and thundered, threatened with shot and shell. While planes and soldiers fell, they had fought so well. Through the sands of death, back from the portal of hell. All that was left of them, left of 130,000. When can their honor fade? Oh, the wild charge they made, and all the world and the people poured. Honor the charge they made, honor the Allied force, the noble 130,000. This is our works cited page, and thank you for listening.